are appropriating. That was a very good one, which I didn't even catch, Rosemary. But all right. So we're going to start and welcome everybody. Today we're going to read the second longest psalm in the book of Psalms. There's a super long psalm that we'll get to eventually, but we're going to get to the longest psalm. And we're also hopefully today going to get to the psalm of the day, which is every day we have a psalm we're supposed to say. And this goes back to the Talmud. I mean, the Shir Shel Yom, it's called, the song of the day, is a very old tradition. And Jewish people for thousands of years have been saying a certain psalm. Now, according to the rabbis, these psalms go back to what the Levites did in the temple. And they may in fact be those psalms, but we don't know that for a fact. It seems actually like these weren't necessarily the psalms that they sang, but the rabbis wanted to establish the psalms of the day, and there's nothing in the psalms themselves that say, hey, this is the Psalm of Tuesday or Psalm of Monday. But as it turns out, today we should be getting to Psalm 82, which is the Psalm of Tuesday. So that's perfect timing. But that wouldn't necessarily, I guess at some point we would get to the Psalm of Tuesday on Tuesday. But we've read a couple of the Psalms so far, and when we get to them, we'll point it. When we get to Psalm 82, we'll point it out. But yeah, we're starting at Psalm 78. And again, as we think about the Psalms and the fact that the Psalms were written over hundreds of years. We know that by the language. We know that by, to some extent, the subject matter that's in them. When it talks about a temple being in existence, and then later on, when it talks about the temple being destroyed, we know, well, that's hundreds of years at least. Well, I mean, I guess it could be 50 years separating it, but we actually know that some of them are hundreds of years, separated.
That it was not all psalms were written by David then?
Yeah, and the reason that so Mike just asked, do even Orthodox folks understand that the Psalms were not all written from David? Yeah, because again, the Psalms of Asaph, the Psalms of the sons of Korah, the Psalms of Moses, they know that they're not all. But the fact that they are actually separated by hundreds of years, and that some of the Psalms that say Psalm of David seem to have been written at completely different times, that might be a problem. But again, these Psalms, and again, some of them that we read reflect very different language. It would be, again, you can imagine if you had a song collection that included Mozart, but also included the Beatles, people would say, well, that's a pretty good variety you have there in your song collection. You'd have a pretty wide variety of musical tastes and styles and themes. But look, even within artists, you have phases where an artist will go through phases and write songs about one subject and then songs about another subject. And, you'd have, the Beatles, even though they really only recorded over about 10 years, had phases where, like, they started out writing songs about, every song was like a 19-year-old boy speaking to, the object of his affection. I want to hold your hand. I want to be your man. She loves me. And then all of a sudden, before you know it, they're singing songs about, well, drugs, and, they're singing songs about politics, and they're singing songs that have kind of heavy messages. And you look at a band like the Rolling Stones, recorded over 6-7 decades, you're talking about songs that are about politics, that are about, love, about, drugs, about lots of stuff. But and that's over one. Hey, what am I talking about? Taylor Swift's been around for 15 years, and she's already had an Eras tour. An Eras tour, mind you. She's in several eras already. But yeah. Oh, I thought you meant the band Berlin. No, Irving Berlin. Irving Berlin, yes, wrote lots of different kinds of music. Yeah. So there's a lot of artists. Wrote a lot of Christmas songs, a lot of Christian holiday songs. Yeah, people, Yeah, people write lots of different music even over their own lifespan. If they get to live like Irving, well, I don't know if Irving Berlin was writing music in the last 10 years of his life, but the guy lived to be like 102 or something. So, you know, if you get to live long enough, Paul McCartney has written, continues to write, and you know, the guy writes, and Paul Simon just wrote a new album, and yeah, so people, yeah, Psalms. We're going to talk about it. So, yeah, people, even individuals, write differently over their lifespan. But yeah, this psalm we're going to read now, Psalm 78, is a long psalm. Irving Berlin was 101, yeah. So we're going to read this Psalm 78, which is so long that you can imagine there's pieces of this that are in different holidays. Some of these lines are in Rosh Hashanah, some are in Passover. Some of these are part of the Tachanun prayers that we do during the week that are petitionary prayers, asking God for forgiveness, you know, daily forgiveness, which now, again, we're in this period of return of forgiveness, Velul, that we just started, which is the time of return. So some of these Psalms, as we said, wind up in the holidays, including this one, but this one's pretty long. This one's 72 lines. So this is a pretty long Psalm. And let's take a look. Let's dive into this, which, as Rosemary already said, this is a great way to give here. Make sure you're listening. And the Torah often talks about looking or seeing or giving ear. There's a Torah portion, actually the Torah portion that we're going to be reading in a couple of weeks when we come to the end of the Torah, called Ha'azinu, give here, listen. And that's the word we have here, Ha'azina, listen. And that actually is a poem, a song that Moses sings to the people, Ha'azinu, and it's traditionally the second to last portion of that we read. The last section is V'zot habracha, that this is the blessing, but the second to last thing is a song that Moses does. So this is called a maskil, which, again, we don't really know exactly what a maskil is versus a song. And again, it's of Asaph. Is that a person? Is that a collection? We're not really sure. And that's why it's usually not translated. So let's dive into this one, which, as I said, you'll notice by the length has a different feeling, a different flow. Let's go.
Give ear, my people, to my teaching. Turn your ear to what I say. I will expound a theme, hold forth on the lessons of the past, things we have heard and known that our ancestors have told us. We will not withhold them from their children, telling the coming generation the praises of God and of divine might and the wonders performed. God established a decree in Jacob, ordained a teaching in Israel, charging our ancestors to make them known to their children, that a future generation might know, children yet to be born, and in turn tell their children, that they might put their confidence in God and not forget God's great deeds, but observe the commandments. And not be like their ancestors, a wayward and defiant generation, a generation whose heart was inconstant, whose spirit was not true to God. Like the Ephraimite archers who played false in the day of battle, they did not keep God's covenant. They refused to follow divine instruction. They forgot what was done for them and the wonders they were shown. God performed marvels in the sight of their ancestors in the land of Egypt, the plain of Zoan. God split the sea and took them through it, making the waters stand like a wall. God led them with a cloud by day and throughout the night by the light of fire. God split rocks in the wilderness and gave them drink as if from the great deep. God brought forth streams from a rock and made them flow down like a river. But they went on sinning, defying the Most High in the parched land. To test God was in their mind when they demanded food for themselves. They spoke against God, saying, "Can God spread a feast in the wilderness?" True, God struck the rock and waters flowed, stream gushed forth, But can God provide bread and supply meat for this people? God heard and then raged. Fire broke out against Jacob. Anger flared up at Israel because they did not put their trust in God, did not rely on divine deliverance. So God commanded the skies above, opened the doors of heaven, and rained manna upon them for food, giving them heavenly grain. Each person ate a hero's meal. They were sent provision in plenty. God set the east wind moving in heaven and drove the south wind mightily. God rained meat on them like dust, winged birds like the sands of the sea, making them come down inside God's camp around the divine dwelling place. They ate till they were sated. They were given what they craved. They had not yet wearied of what they craved. The food was still in their mouths when God's anger flared up at them. God slew their sturdiest, struck down the youth of Israel. Nonetheless, they went on sinning and had no faith in God's wonders. Their days were made to end in futility, their years in sudden death. When stricken, they returned and sought God once again. They remembered that God was their rock, God Most High, their Redeemer. Yet they deceived God with their speech and lied with their words. Their hearts were unconstant. They were untrue to the covenant. But God, being merciful, forgave iniquity and would not destroy, restraining wrath time and again, and not giving full vent to such fury, remembering that they were but flesh, passing breath that does not return. How often did they act defiantly in the wilderness, then cause grief in the wasteland? Again and again they tested God, vexed the Holy One of Israel. They did not remember God's strength or the day they were redeemed from the foe, how God displayed signs in Egypt and wonders in the plain of Zoan. God first turned their rivers into blood, making their waters undrinkable, then inflicted upon them swarms of insects who devour them, frogs to destroy them, then gave their crops over to grubs, their produce to locusts, then killed their vines with hail, their sycamores with frost, then gave their beasts over to hail, their cattle to lightning bolts, and inflicted a burning anger upon them, wrath, indignation, trouble, a band of deadly messengers. God cleared a path for that anger and did not stop short of slaying them, but gave them over to pestilence. God struck every male firstborn in Egypt, the first fruits of their vigor in the tents of Ham. God's own people were set moving like sheep, driven like a flock in the wilderness. God led them in safety. They were unafraid. As for their enemies, the sea covered them. God brought them to the holy realm, the mountain God's right hand had acquired. God expelled nations before them, settled the tribes of Israel in their tents, allotting them their portion by the line. Yet they defiantly tested God Most High and did not observe divine decrees. They fell away, disloyal like their ancestors. They played false like a treacherous bow. They provoked anger with their high places. They kindled wrath with their idols. God heard it and was enraged, utterly rejecting Israel. God forsook the tabernacle of Shiloh, the tent that had been set among mortals. God's might was allowed to go into captivity, that glory into the hands of the foe. This people was given over to the sword, God's very own, the object of rage. Fire consumed their young men, and their maidens remained unwed. Their priests fell by the sword, and their widows could not weep. The sovereign awoke as from sleep, like a warrior shaking off wine, and beat back all foes, dealing them lasting disgrace. God rejected the clan of Joseph and did not choose the tribe of Ephraim. God did choose the tribe of Judah, Mount Zion, which was beloved, building the sanctuary like the heavens, like the earth that God established forever. David, God's servant, was chosen and taken from the sheepfolds. He was brought from minding the nursing ewes to tend the people of Jacob, Israel, God's very own. He tended them with blameless heart. With skillful hands, he led them.
Yep. So 72 lines. It recounts a history of Israel, right? It's a history of Israel from the time they were in Egypt to the time of David. Now, before you sit back and go, okay, I know that history. I mean, you don't have to have read the Bible to kind of know that history. It's a summary. It's not the whole thing. It really covers the time from Exodus, from the 10 plagues down to David, which means it has Exodus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, Samuel, or Joshua, Judges through Samuel, and ends in the book of Samuel. Now, before you go, so what? What's the big deal? The reality is that if that was written during David's time, it ends during David's time. It didn't necessarily have to have been written during David's time, but it doesn't mention anything that happens after David. You'd say, okay, so that was written 1000 BCE during the time of King David. It was written 3,000 years ago. So what? Well, the so what is no biblical scholar believes that the Bible existed as it does 3,000 years ago. So if you go, well, that's kind of sounds like the Bible, okay, but then that's significant because if the story that we just read is very similar to the history that we have in the book, that means that it follows a history that someone 3,000 years ago would have recognized. So, and I'm saying this because there are people who don't believe the Bible was written 3,000 years ago. So this is significant. I mean, this is a significant. This is a significant his view of history that our ancestors gave us, right? So, again, this is not. I mean, this is something to really consider, because this is a piece of history that we have. Anybody have any take on that history that we just read? Anything that you thought was interesting or should be commented on? Anybody?
Well, at first he starts out, praising his ancestors for handing down all this knowledge of God, and then he goes into but they were forgetting God all the time, which I thought was interesting.
It is a blast. It is a recognition of our ancestors. There seems to be like a nostalgia at the beginning, and then it blasts them for the fact that they did not behave well. This is an ongoing issue, Rosemary, in our understanding of who we are. And it makes the Jewish people really unusual from the standpoint of people in the ancient world who kind of nostalgize and think that the golden age was in the past. Judaism has a weird take on it, which is, yeah, God did a lot of stuff for us back in the old days, but it's partly because we needed it, because we kept messing up, and that people were not living in the golden age at that time. They were doing bad stuff. They were really testing God and making their lives miserable because they were upsetting God. And so Judaism is very honest and unique, really, with this understanding that we look back at our ancestors and don't say, hey, everything they did was great. I mean, we have that problem in our country where, we have this nostalgia for a time that never really existed, or at least had darker chapters to it than, than we like to admit. I remember as a kid, and it still exists to some extent, that, I don't remember how old I was exactly, but well, probably around when Happy Days came out, there was this big nostalgia right for the 50s, and there was 50s diners that were opening up, and Johnny Rockets and all these kinds of places that were supposed to take us back to the 50s, which was this nostalgic era where things seemed to be really nice, and that life was simpler then. That we went back before the 60s and the turbulence of the 60s to a time when everybody had a good life. But I think if you were an African American that was living in the South and you couldn't go to one of those 50s diners, you wouldn't have said it was such a great time. So
There were places you couldn't go if you were Jewish too.
That's true too, at least in some places.
In Chicago.
Yeah.
There were apartment buildings that we couldn't move into because we were Jewish.
I know. So nostalgia is an interesting thing, even for us, even for times that we've lived through. The way people remember it and the way people kind of imagine that things were how they were. Judaism kind of has Jewish history has an interesting take on it. It's an interesting recollection too of the plagues. The plagues don't follow that exact.
They don't quite match up, do they?
Correct. But here's the thing, and here's the thing that we've talked about before in the past when we talk about the plagues. The 10 plagues as they exist in our Passover story, and to some extent as they exist in the Bible that we have, are not exactly the plagues that may have the way they've been written. So I want to tell you that, again, this is not something that we talk about a lot. It's it's not something that we focus on a lot, but we always talk about the 10 plagues. The Bible doesn't refer to them as the 10 plagues. And more importantly, according to biblical authorship, the plagues actually are split between the different authors, so that they've been woven together to give us 10 plagues. But the reality is that, let me just show you a little bit right here. A simple, non-provocative description. This is the Wikipedia page on it. Scholars are in broad agreement that the publication of the Torah took place in the mid-Persian period, right? The book of Deuteronomy, composed in stages, mentions the diseases of Egypt, right here. And of course, you could also say the traditional number of 10 plagues is not mentioned in Exodus, or another sources differ. Psalms 78 and 105 seem to list only 7 or 8 plagues and order them differently. It appears that originally there were only 7, to which were added the 3rd, the 6th, the 9th, bringing them to 10. Again, this is an example of differences of where or how these plagues were assembled to give us the final 10. By the time the Bible is edited, right? So by the Persian period, by 2,500 years ago, there are 10 plagues. And so the Talmud talks about 10 plagues. There was an established understanding that there were 10 plagues by the time the way the Torah is woven together, we get the 10 plagues as an order. And we could argue that there actually is a consequential order to the way that they're put together. But that was maybe an editorial decision on getting to those 10 plagues. So the fact that the plagues don't follow quite the order that they exist is actually proof for the fact that, again, the plagues were there were several hands involved in creating the order of how the plagues come to us. So the fact that Psalm 78 doesn't refer to 10 plagues shouldn't surprise us. The fact that the Torah itself somebody doesn't say, Moses isn't told by God, you're going to have 10 plagues. What? So that's why, I mean, one could argue that if you want to show people the different ways that the authors were doing what they were doing, you can look at the 10 plagues themselves. So again, it's not something we focus on a lot, but the fact that we have this in Psalm 78 is actually important because it gives us an ancient version of some of these things. We also have the manna described, which we know is important. It's mentioned several times in the Torah. It's not just mentioned once. And so manna is mentioned, and here in Psalm 78, when it talks about the manna, it particularly says that this was heavenly grain, which means, and we have this described in some cases. You've heard of the word angel's food, right? Angel's food. This is angel's food, the manna. Manna running down in heaven was opening up the heavenly storehouses and giving human beings, particularly us, the food that the angels eat. It should have been enough for us. But of course, it wasn't. So we want meat, which is where we get the slav, the quail, which causes us to be sick. Now, people can argue about what goes on here and the way that the history is laid out. But I honestly feel that the history that is here in Psalm 78 is actually very similar to what we have in the Bible itself, what we have from Exodus down through Samuel. I don't think there's really much. I mean, you can split hairs that there's some differences, but overall, it's a pretty consistent history. I mean, there's a couple of things that we haven't read, like this little reference to the Ephraimite archers. This is probably, again, a reference to something that we read about in the book of Chronicles. We haven't read it yet because we haven't read Chronicles, but Chronicles follows a slightly different history than we have in the books of Kings and Samuel. But there's one thing that doesn't seem to be a big part of our story. But if you do look at this reference to the Ephraimite archers who don't do what they say they're going to do, they fall back and they don't fight. If we look at this other thing that we get to right before the end, that God did not choose Ephraim, right? God chose Judah, right? God chose Judah. God rejected Joseph and did not choose the tribe of Ephraim. This definitely seems to have a southern bias, if you will, a bias from the people who live in the tribe of Judah, the kingdom of King David, right? And so there definitely seems to be a clear feeling that the Ephraimites, the northern tribes, were not the ones chosen intentionally by God. And God chose Judah, chose Mount Zion, which is Jerusalem, and chose King David. So that definitely is part of the agenda that's going on here. So the fact that this ends with King David, it kind of like the final seal on this is how great King David is. He's like the shepherd, the great shepherd that he was as a kid. He's now the shepherd for the people. So, and of course, he doesn't just shepherd the Judah people. He shepherds the whole kingdom of Israel, all of Jacob's children, all the 12 tribes. So there definitely seems to be that kind of feeling to this, that this is a history, but it ends with a very important political agenda, which is, let's all think about how great King David was, how lucky we are to have him. This really does have an agenda, which again follows the Bible and at least follows some part of the issue that exists from the Torah down to the book of Samuel and the book of Kings, which is that the people couldn't get it right until they had King David. All the other rulers that they had, all the other kings or judges or leaders that they had during that time couldn't unify the people until King David did it. And so, even though he had a lot of faults, he is a great leader. And so, when we think about outstanding people, Moses is one of them because he, of course, leads the people. And then you get to King David, who is going to take care of the people and tend them. By the way, the references to Shiloh, that's the place where the tabernacle, where the Mishkan was until it came to Jerusalem, right? So it mentions that, right? But there is an interesting thing in this, which is as we go through this amazing psalm, and you go right here from the beginning, right? As we're moving through the wilderness, right? Go through the great stuff of the tribes. Jacob, Israel, Ephraim, Judah, they're all mentioned. The only person that's really mentioned is David. Well, where's Moses? It talked about all the great stuff that was going on when God took care of us, these plagues, these things that God did for us. Where's Moses? It's interesting, right? Talks about God, it talks about the people, talks about the plagues. Where's Moses? Or Aaron, yeah, that's fair. You see what I'm saying? So this is a really interesting feature that we have, given the fact that David is called out. Right? That's interesting. David, I mean, Jacob is mentioned, but Jacob's really as the ancestor, the people of Jacob. It's B'nai Yaakov, it's B'nai Israel. Yeah.
It's a word in there.
Yeah.
Sanctuary.
Yes.
That, to me, is that a true?
Yeah. So Mike's asking about when it talks about the sanctuary, when it talks about the Mishkan that was at Shiloh, right here. Yes. This is literally the Mishkan. This is the Mishkan of Shiloh. This is where Samuel was when his mother Hannah came and prayed for him and went to Eli. Eli was Eli the judge, the priest was leading the people from Shiloh. And that's what it tells us right there. And that is showing you how important Shiloh was. Yes, this tells us that during in that period from the time the people came into the land of Israel and Shiloh wasn't the only place, but it was there at Shiloh that the ark was captured, right? The Philistines came in and captured it, which it says right here it did. It went into captivity. It doesn't actually mention the Philistines by name, but we know who they're talking about. I mean, you could also say that none of the enemies are mentioned here by name except for the Egyptians. But yeah, it's very interesting that history is there. It's all there. Sometimes it's a little poetic, kind of miss it, but it's there. Yeah. So as I was saying, this poem is used because it's so long. Pieces of it are used. It's so long that it can't really be used in its entirety. But part of it's used for Rosh Hashanah, part of it's used for Passover, part of it's used for the daily Tachanun prayers. Yeah, a lot of it gets chopped up. Probably again because it's such a wide encompassing historical psalm. And again, it's the second longest psalm. So there's one psalm coming up that's super long, but this is pretty long. This is like the length of 4 psalms, or in some cases 5 short psalms, but definitely 2 or 3 minimum. Long, normal, 30 long ones being 30 verses. This one's 72 verses. So you can say this is 4 18-verse psalms. It's a very long psalm, and it covers a historical period that literally lasts for 300 years. So this is it's an interesting psalm, and again, one that definitely I knew was going to be one that had a lot of little pieces to it that we can take a look at. Again, for those who came late, this is definitely still for us very much in the midst of the grief that we're in right now. For those who did not hear, we're definitely thinking about really, dedicating our study today to the 6 people who were again murdered in these last days, whose bodies we recovered. So as I mentioned, we're figuring out whether we're going to do some type of vigil out here, but we are doing a hostage rally on the Thursday. What we're doing, which was planned weeks ago, I mentioned. A couple people were asking. We planned it weeks ago after the August 7th one we did at Culver City. This one was planned then. So just so you know, yeah, this was planned a long time ago. Had nothing to do with the horrible events of this last week. So, yeah, I'm thinking about it again. It's, yeah. Yeah, I'm just seeing if anybody texted me about whether we're doing something out here tonight. We're not. Okay, so let us take a look at Psalm 79, which also begins with the same introduction, Psalm of Asaph. And we're going to see some themes that we'll see these themes throughout all the way till the end. And as I said, these are not in order. So they'll have a psalm that seems to deal with the historical period, maybe that ended with King David 3,000 years ago. And then we'll be reading something that happened 2,700 years ago, 200 or 300 years later. And they definitely give us different feelings. No, there's not. No. So Mike just asked, do I see any kind of order? There definitely was intention in how certain things were put together, but in the sense that there were things that were put together or things that were assembled that you could say, why wasn't that in that other section? There's no way you couldn't say, why was that put there? And so then you have to ask yourself, why, how was it edited in such a way that these things weren't grouped together? And so the theory is that these were edited over, so they were written over several periods and they were edited over several periods. So if you have texts and then you group them together and then you make another section of them and then you weave them together and say, well, I think that section should go with that, or that psalm should go with there, then some people made those editing decisions. And then other people edited them together and said, I don't really care so much about whether these sections go together. We're going to put these psalms here. We're going to, this is where I'm assembling it. No, exactly. And so when people cut and paste and you don't know who they're cutting and where they're cutting and pasting from, then you get what we have, which is stuff that is all over the place. There does seem to have been organizations, but then those were broken up. And in some cases, things were moved around so that a psalm that you would have thought would have been from one period should not have been there. So again, it's not just written over a long period of time, it's edited over a long period of time. And that's where you get these different things going on. So let's take a look at Psalm 79, which is nowhere near as long.
Oh God, heathens have entered your domain, defiled your holy temple, and turned Jerusalem into ruins. They have left your servants' corpses as food for the fowl of heaven, and the flesh of your faithful for the wild beasts. Their blood was shed like water around Jerusalem, with none to bury them. We have become the butt of our neighbors, the scorn and derision of those around us. How long, O Eternal One, will you be angry forever? Will your indignation blaze like fire? Pour out your fury on the nations that do not know you, upon the kingdoms that do not invoke your name. for they have devoured Jacob and desolated his home. Do not hold our former iniquities against us. Let your compassion come swiftly toward us, for we have sunk very low. Help us, O God, our deliverer, for the sake of the glory of your name. Save us and forgive our sin for the sake of your name. Let the nations not say, where is their God? Before our eyes, let it be known among the nations that you avenge the spilled blood of your servants. Let the groans of the prisoners reach you. Reprieve those condemned to death as befits your great strength. Pay back our neighbors sevenfold for the abuse they have flung at you, O sovereign. Then we, your people, the flock you shepherd, shall glorify you forever. For all time, we shall tell your praises.
Yeah, so that psalm definitely has a different feeling.
Yeah.
The psalm has a feeling like we've been kicked in the gut by people around us, and they've actually destroyed our temple. They've actually done things inside our temple, which is, I mean, killed our people, destroyed our temple. Yeah, this is a pretty upsetting piece. Is it from the time of the Babylonian destruction? Well, it seems like that, right? It seems like this is seems like what's going on here. Does anyone recognize any of this prayer from this psalm from any other parts of our liturgy or where it comes? Anybody? There's a line here that we
6 and 7.
Let's see. I'll give you a clue. It's we say it at a holiday, and actually a lot of people don't say it anymore.
6 and 7.
Here, I'll show you. Let me put it up there for you. Here's the let me see if I can find it from the commentary. So here is I'll show you right here. Yeah, John just said verses 6 and 7. How did you know that, John?
Well, I'm a serious scholar.
So does everybody see this right here?
Mm.
Shvochamatcha.
It's in the
We've talked about this before, folks. Yes. Does everyone know this? Have we talked about this recently, or people remember it? Somebody, anybody? Rosemary?
No,
I don't remember us talking about it, but I have talked about it with others.
Who have you talked about it with, Judith? What's your take on this?
My take on this is it's very old, and it's from the Seder, from the Haggadah, and we don't say it anymore because it's mean, but my father, I hear it in his voice. I hear
So
it
when do we say it?
during Seder. We
Yeah,
say
when?
it,
When do we do it?
after we open the door, just before
Yep.
we open the door, to let in
As we open the door.
as we open the door.
Now you and I know that we open the door. We open the door. Here, I'll just show you. This is a more modern reflection of it. Definitely was something we were thinking of. Oh, definitely something we were thinking of this year as we did Passover. I don't know how people did it this year. Um, again, part of it also comes from Psalm 69 that we read not too long ago, and some of it from Lamentations that we read on Tisha B'Av. These are not verses that I remember reciting at past Seders. We sang the song Eliyahu HaNavi. So, yeah, this is from a feminist Jewish website called Ritual Well. Yeah, a lot of Haggadot have, even if they've kept the traditional Shvo Chamatcha, there are the modern Orthodox Haggadah that we use, which is the different night, has the traditional one there, but it also has the a new poem, a new reading for it, which is a nice one. Let me just see if I can open it up for you. It's a additional reading rather than just saying we do this. Here, I'll show you. Hold it a second. Yeah, listen, I've given a lot of thought to this. I don't, there are times when it definitely feels a little bit more appropriate to be angry than other years. I was just going to show you the pour out your love. But yeah, I have parts of it that I've written about or I use, and this is definitely one of them. I think one of the things that so the reading that we have that is in the modern one that I was looking for says, pour out your love, God, on those in the non-Jewish world who do good things for the Jewish people. So it's a reflection of, again, a reality where sometimes, again, we're not so afraid, right? I'll just show it to you real quick. Here it is. So this is the full version of it. This is the full version of the Haggadah, a different night. It's a great Haggadah. Again, we use this at our community Seder for Beth and me. I use it my Seder at home. And let me just get down to the part that we're talking about here. So it's right towards the end. And the concept of saying this, of asking, pour out your wrath, right? The lines. The good thing about this Haggadah too is it gives us all very clearly where it comes from, right? Psalm 79. And then here's the nice one, right? Pour out your love on the nations who have known your kingdom and known you, and the kingdoms who call upon your name, for they've shown loving kindness to the seed of Jacob, and they defend your people Israel from those who would devour them alive. May they live to see the sukkah of peace spread over your chosen ones and to participate in the joy of your nations. It's a blessing you could say over the United States. Right? So they added it. They have it's a traditional Haggadah. They didn't take it out, but they also did that. So why do we do it? Why do we do it at all? Why do we open the door for Elijah? Why do we open the door for Elijah?
So that he can come in and announce the coming of the Messiah.
Yeah, other than the fact that that's a lie.
So that people can see that we're not making matzah out of the blood of Gentile babies.
Correct, Judith. So the reason that the doors were open to the outside were to show that our Gentile neighbors that we were not murdering children for our matzah. So it was to show that nothing bad was going on in our homes. But the Jewish reaction to that was not to let that stand alone, right? To understand that because a blood libel could result in actual Jews being killed this Passover, the blood libel, again, being this charge that Jews use Christian blood for matzah, was also, of course, connected to the extreme religious fervor that was generated around Easter time, which for us is always around the same time, unless there's that weird year where, like we had, where Passover is a month after Easter, but usually it's around the same time. So when Christians are going to passion plays and they're being told by their priests that the Jews murdered Jesus, then if you want revenge, you take it out on Jews. And so Jews were oftentimes killed during Passover time. So as a complete expression of powerlessness, as the Jews opened up their doors to make sure that their Gentile neighbors would not think they were doing anything that, either would result in their being murdered for current actions, which is the fact that Jews continue to kill Christians, especially Christians for matzah, and the deicide that had been going on, charges had been going on for a long time. I mean, the last blood libels were in the 1800s, so this went on for, hundreds and hundreds of years. What do? You open up the door and you say, God, kill these people, because you can't do anything about it. You can't defend yourself. So what you have to do is ask God to do it. God, you do the killing. You know why? Because this time of year, actually this very night, you went out and killed all the Egyptians who were persecuting us. So can you give a little bit of that now? Can you share a little bit of that divine wrath now? Because this Psalm 79, was written at a period where the Jews were suffering the destruction of their temple and felt powerless. And for most of the last 2,000 years, Jews felt powerless. And so they asked for God to do this. God, you take care of business. Go out there and redeem us. Avenge us. So this is a serious deal. This was not coming out of a place of, hey, let's just add a prayer to our Haggadah. This reflected powerlessness and fear. And so now we don't even talk about it. Now we live in a time where Jews are so comfortable for the most part that they don't say this. And let's face it, we also live in a time where if you kill us, we're not waiting for God to take vengeance. We're going to do it ourselves. So think about that one, folks, today. So that's where that psalm comes from. Completely different than the previous psalm in the sense that it reflects a reality. The previous psalm seems to say that David's established a kingdom that is going to start a new era for us. This one is whatever's happened up till however much time elapsed from that to that. This is not a good situation, right? So again, the hope is you'll pay these enemies back, and then everything will be good. So it ends on a happy note, but it starts off sad and ends with hopefully justice. Pay them back sevenfold. And again, part of this is God. This isn't just us that they're doing it to, it's you. You have to defend your credibility, your power. God, this is not just an attack on us, it's an attack on you, right? Right? So you better respond. So again, seems to be reflecting a history. It seems to be reflecting a political situation. It seems to be reflecting a reality. It's a different reality than the previous one. Very different. So again, bouncing around. So let's look at Psalm 80. This is this one has an introduction also of Asaph, but this also says Lam Nazach for the conductor, and it says El Shoshanim on a shosh instrument shaped like the Shoshanim, like the lilies, and it also says an edut, which is some other kind of maybe musical direction, which we are not translating. So the only word we really translate is Lam Natsech for the leader. And then the other parts, Al Shoshanim or El Shoshanim, and the edut, we didn't really translate, or Asaph. Oh, and there's also, this is not also, also gives us a Mizmor, which we translated as a psalm. So that's translated as well. All right. This also has a give ear, Azina, like we had in Psalm 78. So that is a little similar. Even though again, Psalm 79 completely took us out of that. This one may give you at least some semblance of that. And also Psalm 78 talks about the shepherd being David. This also uses the word shepherd, roeh, which of course we have in several Psalms, not least of which the most famous Psalm, Adonai. What do you say? We say, the Lord is my shepherd. Yeah. Anyways, let's go.
Give ear, O shepherd of Israel, who leads Joseph like a flock. Appear, you who are enthroned on the cherubim, at the head of Ephraim, Benjamin, and Manasseh. Rouse your might and come to our help. Restore us, O God, show your favor that we may be delivered. O Eternal One, God of hosts, how long will you be wrathful toward the prayers of your people? You have fed them tears as their daily bread, made them drink great measures of tears. You set us at strife with our neighbors. Our enemies mock us at will. O God of hosts, restore us. Show your favor that we may be delivered. You plucked up a vine from Egypt. You expelled nations and planted it. You cleared a place for it. It took deep root and filled the land. The mountains were covered by its shade, mighty cedars by its boughs. Its branches reached the sea, its shoots the river. Why did you breach its walls so that every passerby plucks its fruit? Wild boars gnaw at it, and creatures of the field feed on it. O God of hosts, turn again, look down from heaven and see, take note of that vine, the stalk planted by your right hand, the stem you have taken as your own. For it is burned by fire and cut down, perishing before your angry blast. Grant your help to the one at your right hand, the mortal you have taken as your own. We will not turn away from you. Preserve our life that we may invoke your name. O Eternal One, God of hosts, restore us. Show your favor that we may be delivered.
So this psalm definitely goes back to some of the feeling and the tone that we had in Psalm 78, not the last one, but the one before that. So this one definitely seems to be talking about the Exodus, right? It talks about, you plucked up a vine from Egypt, you expelled nations and planted it. It definitely, again, refers to a time when things aren't going well for us, but it doesn't seem like the temple is necessarily destroyed. Definitely seems, again, difficult times, but yeah. But this one does refer to Ephraim, Benjamin, and Manasseh, right? This seems to be at least referring to a time when those tribes are still around, because at least Ephraim and Manasseh, those are going to be some of the tribes that get exiled, and they get exiled 200 years before the temple was destroyed. So, I mean, you could say, talking about a time that's way far in the past, like time of Egypt. But yeah. Anybody else have any thoughts or any questions or comments about this psalm, about excuse me, about Psalm 80, which again definitely seems to be referring to things, historically, which again, when the Psalms talk about things that are in the past, we're always constantly saying, did we read that? Is that in the Bible? Do we know that story? Because it's the Bible. And if the Bible is reflecting on other parts of the Bible, we want to know. So there definitely seems to be a little bit of referring to the Northern Kingdom. But again, this is a psalm that doesn't figure prominently in our prayers. I mean, it's traditionally said on Passover. Some traditions have it being read during Passover because it does refer to Exodus. But again, this is definitely referring to things that we have in the Bible. And for that, that's important and gives us a chance to understand if how much of the Bible that we have is the Bible that the people who are singing these songs has. So, all right. Whether it gives us a great indicator of when the psalm was written, there's definitely differences of opinion. I mean, there are people who think it's a later psalm, that it refers to when the temple was attacked in 586, or again, it seems like maybe it's from the northern time when the northern kingdom was being attacked. And of course, Israel was sacked, and the southern kingdom during that Assyrian siege, as we read in Kings, Jerusalem was completely surrounded and laid siege to by the Assyrians, and a lot of places in Judah were destroyed. Not the temple, though. All right. Well, let's move on then to Psalm 81, which is a psalm where again we have a lamnatseach, and we also have al gatit. The gatit seems to be an instrument, or maybe it's a style, maybe it's a mode, maybe it's again an instrumental mode that we don't know. And it also says asaph. This is an asaph psalm. These psalms, none of these psalms we've been reading today, some of them did say Mizmor, but none of them said Mizmor LeDavid. None of them said a psalm of David. So let's take a look at Psalm 81.
Sing joyously to God, our strength. Raise a shout for the God of Jacob. Take up the song. Sound the hand drum, the melodious lyre and harp. Blow the horn on the new moon, on the full moon for our feast day. For it is a law for Israel, a ruling of the God of Jacob, imposed as a decree upon Joseph when he went forth from the land of Egypt. I heard a language that I knew not. I relieved his shoulder of the burden. His hands were freed from the basket. In distress you called, and I rescued you. I answered you from the secret place of thunder. I tested you at the waters of Meribah, Selah. Hear, my people, and I will admonish you, Israel, if you would but listen to me. You shall have no foreign god. You shall not bow to an alien god. I, the Eternal, am your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt. Open your mouth wide, and I will fill it. But my people would not listen to me. Israel would not obey me. So I let them go after their willful heart, that they might follow their own devices. If only my people would listen to me, if Israel would follow my paths, then would I subdue their enemies at once, strike their foes again and again. Those who hate God shall cower, their doom shall be eternal. God fed Israel the finest wheat. I sated you with honey from the rock.
And that's a famous phrase. That's actually the line that I used to describe this class. Honey from the rock. We don't really have a story in the Bible that we got honey from a rock. We got water from a rock. We got manna from heaven. And that definitely seems to be kind of a theme. If there's not a organizing principle of the Psalms we just read, but they all seem to kind of refer back to the Exodus. I mean, there's other Psalms that do, but this one does. And it also talks about God giving us food. I mean, this one actually says right here, right? Open your mouth wide and I will fill it. And then here at the end, God fed Israel with the finest wheat. I sated you with honey from the rock. So there does seem to be a theme here, which is God providing food for us, providing sustenance, going back to the manna, going back to those kinds of things that God gave us. So there definitely is that feeling. This one has references to Exodus, obviously. It says, took you. The waters of Meribah, which are mentioned as a place where, again, the people were crying out to God for water. This tells us, again, some of the instruments that people used. We've read about all of these instruments, the nevel, chinor, the tof, which is some kind of drum, maybe a tambourine, some kind of hand drum. I mean, more than a tambourine, but or bigger than a tambourine, a tof. But it's a drum people would hold. And it can blowing a shofar on a Rosh Chodesh, right? Blowing it on our holidays. But you can see Rosh Chodesh was pretty important, right? Rosh Chodesh was the beginning of a new time for us. It happens to be Rosh Chodesh today. So this is Rosh Chodesh Elul. Rosh Chodesh Elul went over yesterday and into today. Rosh Chodesh Elul is a time for us to, today and tomorrow. I mean, it's, last night through, some Rosh Chodeshes are 2 days. Right? Rosh Chodesh goes sometimes, if there's the 30th of a month, there's usually 29 days in a Jewish holiday, Jewish month. But Rosh Chodesh as a holiday will sometimes be, if there's 30 days for that month, and it will be the 30th and the 1st. So that goes into today, would be last night, tonight, and into tomorrow on Wednesday. Will all be Rosh Chodesh for this month of Elul, which begins officially the process of repentance, of return. The 30 days of Elul, and then going into the first 10 days of Tishrei, those 40 days. But this is a time when people, as you can see, would blow the shofar, and they would dance, they would sing, and they would use all different kinds of music, string instrument, percussion, and horns. So this psalm is also appropriate, definitely, to today, to be able to celebrate with that. But again, this psalm seems to be containing, these warnings, right? Not to have other gods, which is a problem, right? These are the problems that people are dealing with. They're being punished because they keep slipping back into idolatry. They keep doing the wrong thing. What's interesting about this psalm is that this psalm, from verse 7 or actually, yeah, it starts in verse 7. This is God talking. This is the first person God, right? Hear my people, and I will admonish you. Israel, if you but listen to me. Much of this psalm is God speaking. All the way to verse 15 is God. So most of this psalm, or half, a little over half of this psalm, I guess you could say, is God talking to the people. Asaph. Well, whoever, yeah, however this was edited or, recorded. We don't know what Asaph is, again, whether it's a person or whether it's a collection, whether Asaph was a collection of psalms. But the point is that this is God speaking to the people, right? Which is interesting because, again, it shows you that the songs would have been sung not just from the standpoint of people speaking to God, but sometimes using God's own voice to kind of say to the people, this is what God is saying to us. This is what God says. So again, verse 16, it changes back to a person saying, actually, the last line is, the last part of it is God speaking again. I sated you with honey from the rock. So that's again, the themes are similar, right? The themes are similar to, things that we've seen. But again, a little different. I mean, the fact that, again, a lot of this psalm is God's voice. So again, this psalm, kind of, we're halfway through the book of Psalms, and you can see that some of these psalms are have a different voice. Have a different different way of finding their way into our into our consciousness. This psalm, Psalm 80, is actually the psalm of Thursday, the Shir Shal Yom for Thursday. So traditionally, this psalm would be read on Thursday. So this psalm clearly is, got a place in our liturgy. But again, it's also recited. Some people recite it on Rosh Hashanah. It's also part of the Amidah for Rosh Hashanah. So, this is a psalm that, is fairly, it's used. I mean, it's some of the psalms are not used nearly as much as this psalm is. So this psalm is frequently, if it's a psalm for Thursday, it means every week. Traditionally, we've said this psalm. So this is a psalm that finds its way into our into our liturgy, into our consciousness. But again, there's parts of this that seem like, things that we've heard before, said before. I mean, this line right here sounds like the Ten Commandments, right? Anochi Adonai Elohecha. It's not exactly the same, but I am the eternal who brought you out of the land of Egypt. Ours is Asher Hotzeti Echa Me'eretz Mitzrayim. This is close. I mean, it says I brought you out of the land of Egypt. But again, this one's the piece of this that seems interesting is, and again, it's in the context of not having any other gods. But this does seem to be the theme of open your mouth and I will fill it. And what am I going to fill it with? Honey from the rock. So that definitely seems to be a theme of what we've got going on. Any other thoughts, feelings, anything that this evokes in you? Anything that you want to share? Anybody? In which case, then we are going to now continue on to Psalm 82, which is the Psalm of the day. It is the Psalm for Tuesday. It is the Shir Shal Yom. It is the traditional Psalm of Tuesday. Now, according to, again, the Talmud, the Psalms of the day were already established by the Talmudic period. Okay, so this is actually not read in Brachot, which is the section that we're reading on Wednesdays, which you should all come to, but it is read in the tractate about Rosh Hashanah, which is interesting because, again, that tractate is one of the early tractates in the Talmud. but it's not a tractate that we're necessarily going to be reading really, really soon. But I will show you that the Talmud says, and the wonderful thing about Sepharia that we use on Wednesdays is that you can go right to the things. So Rabbi Yehuda said in the name of Rabbi Akiva, on the first day of the week, on Sunday, what psalm would they sing? The Levites would sing Psalm 24. And on Monday, what psalm would they sing? Psalm 48. Why? Again, the Talmud tells us it's because these things are alluded to in the Psalms. Psalm for today, the third day of the week. God stands in the congregation of God, Psalm 82. Because on the third day he revealed the land in his wisdom and thereby prepared the world for his assembly and can now be on the dry land. Well, as we read in Psalm 82, which we're about to read and jump into, you'll see why. But we're going to talk about a very interesting factor in this psalm that many people have talked about, and we shall talk about it today. But this is Psalm 82, the psalm for today. So we are doing something very traditional by reading Psalm 82 today. Here we go, a psalm of Asaph.
God stands in the divine assembly, pronouncing judgment among the divine beings. How long will you judge perversely, showing favor to the wicked? Selah. Judge the wretched and the orphan, vindicate the lowly and the poor, rescue the wretched and the needy, save them from the hand of the wicked. They neither know nor understand. They go about in darkness. All the foundations of the earth totter. I had taken you for divine beings, attendants of the Most High, all of you. But you shall die as mortals do, fall like any prince. Arise, O God, judge the earth, for all the nations are your possession.
Yeah, very short. It's only 8 verses. Again, there seems to be a reference to the land. So maybe this is the foundations of the earth are mentioned, which is why we can read it on day 3, which is the time that God brought the earth out of the waters. What's going on in this psalm? What's going on in this psalm? Why is this psalm? What's going on here?
First sentence identifies those that are judging people, those that are in a position of authority, judging others.
Well, that's what it's that. Yeah, that's what it says in your book, right?
Well, yes, but I'm not reading it.
Okay, so what? But wait, let's step back for a second. Let's just read it for a second. Let's just take a look at what we just read. What do you think people have an issue about? Rosemary, what's going on
Divine
here?
beings, who are they?
Yeah. What the heck's that about?
God's court.
So what would you say that is?
Heaven.
Okay, so the angels, right? That's the traditional answer. The traditional answer is that this is God speaking to other angels.
Speaking day.
Yeah.
God's not.
No, God is speaking to the angels. But here's the problem. The phrase actually says, God stands in the divine assembly, pronouncing judgment upon the divine beings. The word that's used for divine beings is
Elohim.
yeah. And so the King James has no issue translating it the way it says. Now, the King James, remember, was written by Europeans who had a pagan history, which they understood that they kind of had given up. But this idea that God invokes, kind of convokes or assembles these divine beings, yeah, our rabbis translated this as angels. And the translation we have here, which is a Jewish translation, we'll continue that by translating it as divine beings, which opens it up to angels. And if you're not careful and you didn't read it in Hebrew, you'll say, oh, okay, it's divine beings. That's not what it says. Now, I remember many, many years ago when I came at my early on in my relationship with my professor of Bible, who was, as I mentioned before, Richard Friedman, who wrote the book on who wrote the Bible. I came at him and said, and again, I thought I knew the Bible fairly well. Obviously, I didn't think I knew it as well as he did. But, you know, like most Jews and people who care about the Bible and see it as the foundation of our history, I came at him and I said to him as my teacher, an early teacher, I didn't know him for very long when I came at him with this, but of course, you know, if you have a teacher and you want to ask him a hard question, I asked him a hard question. Well, a hard question for me, right? I came at him with this. I came at him with one of my most I didn't understand what was going on in this story. This is the story of the creation of right after Adam and Eve, right? And here's the story of Noah, right? And as it introduces us to Noah, there's 4 lines in here that I asked him. I said, you know, Professor, what's going on here? What's going on with these lines? When humankind began to increase on earth and daughters were born to them, the divine beings, which says B'nai Elohim, saw how pleasing the human women were and took wives from among those who delighted them. God said, my breath will not abide with them forever, with humankind forever, since it's to his flesh, right? Let the days allowed them be 120 years. It was then and later too that the Nephilim appeared on earth when divine beings cohabited with human women who bore them offsprings. Such were the heroes of men of old and men of renown. Hagiborim, these are these great beings that lived on the earth who were the children of human beings and human women and B'nai Elohim. So the word there, B'nai Elohim, is there twice. And it seems to include some kind of understanding that human beings aren't going to live a very long time anymore. They're only going to live 120 years. And it seems to have something to do with this. I mean, that much we can see. But what's really going on here, I'm like, what's going on? Like, what is this? And he said, look, I don't really know. I mean, we don't really know. People who read this don't know. The best guess we have is the Bible contains a mythological element here, which everyone believed in the ancient world. And the Bible kind of answered it, but didn't really answer it to anyone, like to your satisfaction, to my satisfaction. It doesn't really explain it. But this idea that there were human beings that were a race of giants that were divine beings, half divine and half human, seems to have been a pretty widely held belief. And the Bible has something about it, but it doesn't have a lot. So I said, okay, but where else is it? And he said, read Psalm 82. And I never, like in my mind, I knew what Psalm 82 was. I knew it was Psalm of Tuesday. I knew it was in my prayer book. I knew what Psalm 82 was, but I always read it the way the Bible in my translation had it and the way the Hebrew prayer book had it, which was, it's angels. So Psalm 82 seems to be, again, telling us or giving us a vision of God speaking to other divine beings. Are they gods? I don't know. The word Elohim is used there. It's the same word that's used here. It's not good. And as you can see, these gods are not doing what they're supposed to be doing. So no matter what, if these angels or God beings or whatever they are, they're not doing what they're supposed to be doing. God is fed up with them. God is saying they are not doing their job. Now, This seems problematic to me from the standpoint if they are gods, right? As a Jew, and we just read previously in the last Psalm, don't have other gods. It said, don't have other gods. Now, it did say, don't have other gods before me. Don't have any other gods that do things like me. I'm the head God. And that's what some people think is going on in the Bible, that there's a movement from I'm the God for you and the only God for you to I'm the only God that exists, period. And that this Psalm 82 and that the version of Genesis that we have, those 4 verses, seem to recount a time when people were not necessarily opposed to the idea that there were other gods. It just they didn't really do anything, and they're secondary to our God. That our God is the God. Yes. And the fact that the word Elohim is a plural is what Mike is saying. The fact that Elohim is a plural word is part of what we have going on here, which is, does the word itself reflect a time when people thought there was a pantheon, that there were other gods, and that our God was just the one in charge? Look, I can only tell you that at least by the time the Bible was edited, the first 5 books, that there seems to be very clearly be an understanding that there is only one God. Shema Yisrael and Eloheinu Adonai Echad. God is one. Seems to me in the Shema to be an affirmation that there's only one God, or that everything is the one God. It's all one. I don't know how you want to understand that other than at least by the time of the Shema, Deuteronomy, that's not the case. Look, if there are other gods that exist and they're just not as powerful as our God, you could understand why people kept lapsing into other gods, because they were all around them. They were like, nah, that's just not our God. Stop, put that God away. He's not our God. When Jews felt comfortable enough to say, no, those other gods don't exist, there is only God, then maybe it was a little easier for people to be truly monotheistic. Well, Greece would have not been in existence, at least in its heyday, until the 500s. So at least by the time of the Shema, Jews would have already have affirmed this monotheism. All I can tell you, and again, I mean, that's interestingly right around that time in the 500s, that's when Socrates got in trouble with the people of Athens for, according to them, blaspheming and speaking out against the gods. And they gave him the option of killing himself. They also told him he could leave, and or at least some of the people were going to get him out of there. And decided to kill himself instead, or not kill himself. That he had to die, but he had to take his own life, whatever. But yeah, he got in trouble for maybe saying similar things. But the point is that in Israel, that was already affirmation of the people, right? That was what they were supposed to at least be saying. But you can understand why maybe it was harder for them if they still said things like this. You could understand why people would maybe have a hard time with idolatry. So again, maybe it took this next step of saying, no, there are no other gods. They don't exist. So this psalm seems to be reflecting a transition period, seems to be written at a time when people could still say things like this. All I can tell you is, yes, when I read Psalm 82, whatever, 40 years ago, or 35 years ago, when I read it and finally read it and said, oh yeah, that's true. What's interesting about this is that we didn't bury this psalm. If that is the case, if this psalm is somewhat reflective of a transition to pure monotheism, we didn't bury this psalm. We read this psalm traditionally every Tuesday. So it wasn't like we hid this psalm. That's the thing that I found interesting, is like, well, if this is problematic theologically, then wouldn't we like try not to use it a lot? No, we have no issue with this, because there seems to be this understanding that the psalm is talking about something that we really need to wake ourselves open to, understand, right, and to think about frequently, which is whatever we do, if we're not putting ourselves into a situation where we're doing the right thing, whatever our system is, if we're judging perversely, if we're showing favor to the wicked, if we're not giving the benefit of the doubt to the orphan and the lowly and the poor, if we're not saving the needy, then whatever you want to call it, whether you're saying you worship other gods or your system is messed up, you're doing the wrong thing. Right? And God is disappointed in us. So, I will tell you this. The rabbis had no issue interpreting Elohim, not only not as angels. Okay, fine. They're angels. No. They even interpreted it as Elohim are judges. And the rabbis will frequently say that when we see a word for Elohim, that it isn't just even an angel, definitely not another God, but even if it may be not even a divine being, it's human beings. And so the rabbis will oftentimes refer to references of Elohim in the Bible as references to judges. And here they definitely do judging. Here it says right at the beginning, how long will you be judging wrong, perversely? How long are you pronouncing judgment? Yishpot. The word is that these divine beings or these angels or these judges are doing the wrong thing. They're definitely, like, again, I'm just telling you, what this has nothing to do with divine beings. Yeah. The rabbis actually said that. They said, when you see the word Elohim, pull that word out and put the word judge. So God stands in our court and says to the other judges, how long will you be judging perversely? Bless you. So what we say at the end here is God judged the earth, right? Because I thought you were real legitimate judges, but you're not. Now, again, dying as mortals do seem to be God stripping these judges of immortal life. But he's definitely punishing them. Look, early Christians looked at this psalm and said, oh, this seems to me God has other gods. So they looked at this psalm and said, oh, the fact that Jesus would be a divine being, it says right here. So they definitely looked at it from that standpoint. Though it seems to be here that God's saying, I'm not doing this anymore. I'm not letting these divine beings continue to do what they're doing. But you can understand why my professor said, look at this psalm, because this psalm also seems to be indicating that, just like it says in chapter 6 of Genesis, God pulls the plug on other divine beings doing important stuff, which then you could make the case for, well, why would Christianity go back to that? Because at least by the time of the rabbis, they're saying, no, this is God saying, whoever is in charge, whether it's an angel, whether it's, they're not going to say other gods, but they're saying angels, or whether these are judges, God's not giving other people power to do this stuff if they're going to do it wrong. So it's a real, look, just the fact that they didn't bury this psalm is interesting to me to some extent, because if this is really problematic, then why would you even have it? Let alone, why would you put it out on display every Tuesday? So they did. We did. We had no issue with it. I mean, we did not understand it from that standpoint. I didn't understand it that standpoint until, literally say, hey, take a look at this. This seems to be God speaking on a basic level to angels saying, or to divine beings saying, I'm not giving you any power. Or you're not having the power that I thought you'd have. God's disappointment in these divine beings or these angels, which of course leads to the later myths of fallen angels, the angels who are not happy with being demoted, if you will. But this is where you kind of get those things. Again, it's been understood traditionally without problems for a long time by us. But, are there elements to this that are reflective of non-monotheistic times? It's possible. It's possible. Yeah. Please, yeah. Yep. Which, sons, children, it's B'nai. It shows you the King James is a little bit more progressive, egalitarian. But yeah, you can understand why when you read that translation in the King James Bible and Christian reading of this already by then for over 1,000 years. And you could make the argument again, as it said, from chapter 6 of Genesis. When it says B'nai Elyon, which is attendants, they translate it as attendants, and you can see right here, literally sons. For early Christians to say, well, if Jesus called himself the Son of God, he wasn't doing anything that other people or other divine beings hadn't done. Why couldn't Jesus be the Son of God? So yeah, there's a basis for it. I would tell you, you got to be a little careful, because if that's the case, God just called them out. Do you want to be one of those things? Because God just called you out. And you will die as mortals do. Now, you can make the argument that again leads to Jesus dying. But is that a good thing? Because in the context here, God is not happy with what they were supposed to be doing, which was taking care of the earth, taking care of the system, right? Making sure everything was running smoothly. And they weren't. The judges were allowing chaos to reign on earth and for bad things to happen. And that's why they're punished. So again, at the end of the day, this is a psalm of God taking control and saying, I don't trust you. However you're going to translate B'nai Elohim, you're going to say, wow, this is not good. These people are not doing what they're supposed to be doing. But yeah, you could say it opens it up for B'nai Elyon, sons of the Most High. Gloria, are you on with your translation commentary?
I'm here. Hold
So
on.
what does your commentary say on that?
Which verse again?
On verse 6.
6. Okay, hang on one second. I'll find it.
While she's getting that, my 6 after the heavenly court says Elion is an ancient Canaanite epithet for Baal, here applied to God.
So why does it say that? So Elyon, so John just said Elyon is one of the things that God is known by in the Canaanite religion, Elyon. We have El Elyon used in our prayers. El Elyon, yeah. We say it in the Amidah. God the Most High. God on the highest throne, if you will. What they're saying with that commentary is that this sounds a lot like Canaanite poetry. This sounds like a Canaanite psalm. Well, look, of course it sounds like a Canaanite psalm. The Canaanites had a pantheon of gods. So God looking out on the pantheon of other gods and saying, gods, you're doing a horrible job. Could that psalm have been a Canaanite psalm and that the Jews appropriated and said, see, the Canaanites have a psalm that says the head God looks at all the other gods and say, you're losers. You failed. Guess what? That's a perfect psalm for us to use because we believe there's one God who looks at anything else and says, nothing will rule like me. The one God. So yeah, it could be that, I mean, I could see that easily have happened. That's what that commentary is basically going with, which is that this was a psalm that was borrowed. We appropriated it and we kind of twisted it, maybe used it almost in its entirety as a psalm condemning other gods or the need to have other gods. It is possible. So Glory, what does yours say for
Okay, the verse actually reads in mine, I said, you are gods, you are all sons of the Most High. And then the commentary, those who rule or do so by God's appointment, and thus they are his representatives, whether they acknowledge him or not.
Wow. That's almost Jewish. That's almost the rabbinic take on it. I'm not joking. That's basically not going with this is a that's the traditional Jewish ancestor answer to what does that mean, Elohim? And not go with the King James even, which is so again, there's a lot of different ways to read this psalm. It's interesting again that this psalm is not a psalm that we hid. Like part of me said, when I first read it like opened my eyes to the pagan nature of this psalm or the Canaanite nature of this psalm. Because I think I said to him also that this was like a Canaanite psalm. He says, yeah, probably. My first thought was, why are we saying this psalm all the time? Why is anyone admitting to this psalm? It seems so pagan, but yeah, it's amazing that we didn't bury it. It's front and center on Tuesday. So Tuesdays, you definitely though read with this. It ends with this wonderful line though: "Arise, God, judge the earth, for all the nations are your possession." Right. So this is definitely a recognition that God is in charge of everything. And again, the word Elohim is used here, not Adonai, Elohim. But as I said, it also uses again other words that we use for God, El Elyon. But yes, this does not use the word Adonai. The Yud He Vav He name is not used in this psalm ever at all, not once. All right, and again, it's not uncommon. I mean, the next psalm is a psalm that uses Elohim as well. So we're going to finish this psalm. We'll finish with this psalm today, which I wasn't sure. I mean, I knew we would get to Psalm 82, but I also knew we'd spend some time on Psalm 82. Again, very short psalm, 8 verses, but man, there's some stuff in there. So this psalm is a shir, is a song. It's a mizmor, it's a psalm, and it also is la asaf. So let's take a look at Psalm, and this is where we'll finish, which again is kind of right around where I thought we would be able to get to today. Psalm, and we will be in person next week too, God willing. So here we go.
O God, do not be silent. Do not hold aloof. Do not be quiet, O God. For your enemies rage. Your foes assert themselves. They plot craftily against your people. Take counsel against your treasured ones. They say, let us wipe them out as a nation. Israel's name will be mentioned no more. Unanimous in their counsel, they have made an alliance against you. The clans of Edom and the Ishmaelites, Moab and the Hagrites, Gebal, Ammon, and Amalek, Philistia with the inhabitants of Tyre. Assyria too joins forces with them. They give support to the descendants of Lot, Selah. Deal with them as you did with Midian, with Sisera, with Yavin at the brook Kishon, who were destroyed at Endor, who became dung for the field. Treat their nobles like Oreb and Zeeb, all their princes like Zevah and Zalmunna, who said, let us take the meadows of God as our possession. Oh my God, make them like thistledown, like stubble driven by the wind. As a fire burns a forest, as flames scorch the hills, pursue them with your tempest, terrify them with your storm, cover their faces with shame, so that they seek your name, O Eternal One. May they be frustrated and terrified, disgraced and doomed forever.
Wow. So definitely a psalm of God's get God's vengeance. Oh no, I thought that was it. Oh, sorry. I cut it out one day. Yeah, one. Okay. Yep.
May they know that your name, yours alone, is God, supreme over all the earth.
Yeah, that's important. It's again, it's along the same theme, which is destroying our enemies. Now, what of course is interesting about this is what enemies are mentioned, what enemies are not mentioned, right? There are enemies who are mentioned here who again seem to be fairly late enemies, which include the Assyrians, right? The Assyrians are mentioned here. And Amalek is mentioned here, which we know, of course, the Amalekites, the Philistines, the Phoenicians. But here's a phrase that we don't have a lot, actually very unusual. The Ishmaelites are listed here, which are again the Arabs, the people who are sons of Ishmael, but they're also here are the Hagrites, the descendants of Hagar, that's Ishmael. But to actually call out them as the descendants of Hagar is very unusual. Ishmael is used a lot, but Hagar is not. And so that's an interesting kind of additional piece of this is a that this is a connection to Hagar. Just as there's a connection with Lot, right? Which again, it says B'nai Lot, which include the Ammonites and Moabites, who are called out already. So the fact that Hagar is mentioned with the Ishmaelites, and by the way, that Edom is mentioned with them, isn't unusual because they're actually in the same area, right? So these people all inhabit the same area, and we actually read that Edom was married into Ishmael's family. So the fact that the Edomites and the Ishmaelites are living together in the land of today, Jordan and Saudi Arabia, is not surprising. Gebal is not mentioned as a separate nation usually, and Amalek is usually not mentioned in the context of these other nations, because while the Amalekites are a bad enemy of us, they don't seem to be a nation that lives in a certain place. There's not an area, a territory that we call Amalek, because Amalek seems to be, they're raiders, they're nomadic raiders that attack, come out of the desert and then attack and then go back to the desert. They don't have a home. They don't have a place where we can attack them, and they don't have like towns and cities. So this is an unusual thing. But when we talk about the places that we did attack and that we did succeed against in battle, it talks about the Midianites, right? But it also talks about Sisera and Yabin, the brook of Kishon. This is the story of Deborah, the prophet, and Yael, right? This is the war that we read about in the book of Judges with Barak, who again, according to tradition, goes to Deborah and says, how do we defeat these people? The people, Sisera and Yabin, they are Canaanites. They are Canaanite kings. Endor, of course, is mentioned in Star Wars. It's not the same Endor. It's the Endor that's mentioned, Ain Dor, which is the well, the spring of Dor. That's the end. N is a spring, like Ein Gedi. So this is a place, but it's a place where there was a spring, which is interesting because sometimes they translate it as a spring, and sometimes if it's part of the name of the city, they'll just write it out as Endor or Engev or En Gedi. So these are other kings and leaders that we defeated, right? Oreb and Zeeb, that we destroyed these people. Some of these people we've never read about before, folks. You're not missing. You didn't miss them. We didn't mention them. But the book of, the book of Psalms, because we don't know when these Psalms were written, references to things that I mean, sometimes we can figure out by the references when it was written, but all we know from right now is that this was sometime after this had happened, the war with Sisera and Yabin, which we read about in the book of Judges. We know exactly when that was. And the Assyrians, we don't really see on the scene until the 800s. So how late is this? Could be from a period of time after King David, after, again, we're talking about into the time of the later kings of Judah. But this definitely gives us a vision of who our enemies were, at least by this point. Doesn't seem to be as much a Canaanite problem, which makes sense since we settled the land of Canaan and made it our home again, if you will, the promised land. But these other nations around us seem to be a problem. And again, at this time, the Philistines and the Phoenicians are definitely part of that mix, part of the people that we're still dealing with as enemies. I mean, we know that the Amalekites, that King David fought against the Amalekites, that they were still a problem well after Moses fought the Amalekites. But again, some of these people we've had problems with from the Philistines. We have problems with, all the way through the book of Judges and into the time of King David. And some of them, again, like the Canaanites, don't really seem to be a problem anymore. So, yeah, this is definitely a psalm that's opening that our new enemies, or our current enemies, I should say, will have the same fate as those who've come at us in the past. So, yeah. What, of course, is interesting is that all these nations are long gone. All of them are long gone. The last traces of them are in some of the names of the places around the Middle East. But for the most part, again, the only reason we know of these people is because we talk about them. I mean, that's the fact. The Ammonites are only the only reference to the Ammonites anywhere is the capital of Jordan, Ammon. It's the only place where we'd even know that there were any people called Ammon. So, yeah, these are not peoples that we know of anymore. And again, almost every vestige of their existence has been wiped out.
I find it interesting, lines 5 and 6. It may not be, time period appropriate, but the notes here for 5 and 6, the last threat against Israel is a threat against God. If Israel's name is no longer mentioned, God's name will be forgotten. So that, for some reason, the Romans pop into my mind trying to rename Israel.
Well, yeah, after the Philistines. Yeah.
I know it's not.
No.
Some things from these Psalms or whatever, they point me in different directions.
Look, could also say this is what the people coming against Israel today are saying. Look, there's a reason why Iran they'll never mention Israel by name. They call it the Zionist entity, the Zionist enemy. They won't use the word Israel. So, yeah, there's a definite usage or lack of usage of the name even amongst Hamas and some of the Palestinians. They refer to Israel as Jews. They don't refer to it as Israel. So by not mentioning Israel, by not saying the name, it's as if we don't exist. So, yeah, referring to it as a nation recognizes it. And so by not recognizing it, and again, there's people in our community that also would rather not refer to Palestinians as a nation as well. So, yeah, by not mentioning it or not recognizing it as a nation, by not calling it that, that's as if to say that it doesn't exist. Yes, I'm not gonna go there, but I will tell you that today, as we go out and wish everybody a Shana Tova, it's very hard to wish people a Happy New Year right now. I find, especially in the last couple of days, it's been really hard to feel like this New Year's going to be happy.
It was a
But
tough year.
yeah, I thought I was done, but I'm not done. I thought I was done crying, and it turned out I was not done crying. So as we go out today, wish people a good period of return, or a healthier period of return. Let's just go out with, for everybody on the other end there, let's just hear the sound of a shofar and blow the shofar for the month of Elul, which be better. Of course, this is Messianic site. So folks, they always have something good there. Thank you, Rosemary, for reading for us. And again, we hope to see everybody next week and in the coming days.
You will not
And-
see me next week. I'm going to be away for a couple weeks.
Yes, you're on a journey of discovery.
Yes.
A journey of discovering how your planes are doing. Your plane is doing, I should say. Anyways, have a safe journey, Rosemary. We'll be thinking about you, and hopefully we'll see you. If not in person, we'll see you soon. Thanks, everybody. Take care. Be safe.